Priya, I think you can start.
Okay, a very good afternoon to everyone and a warm welcome to this highly anticipated Prime seminar titled Data and Democracy. I am Priya, Director of Prime, and together with Nazirul Hazim, the Chief Examiner and Unit Leader of ETW 2510, Introduction to Econometrics, we are, as you can see, we are excited to host Rafizi Ramli, founder of INVOKE Malaysia and the National Oversight and Whistleblower Center now. So today through PRIME, which stands for the Principles of Responsible Management Education Platform, we will see how data relates to ethics and sustainability and privacy rights in the post-pandemic era. We will also hear about Rafizi Ramli's vision of democracy for Malaysia and the role INVOKE plays in realizing his vision. As future business leaders, this is an important topic for students, and we are glad to have such an esteemed guest speaking to all of us about his experience in the field. Without further ado, I hand the session over to the moderator for this afternoon, Nazirul Hazim.
Thank you, Priya. So I'll just take a few minutes to intro our topic a little bit. So data and democracy. So for the last decade or so, we were saying data is a new oil. This is like our mantra, right? And in econometrics, we're excited when we hear about, data scientists, the sexiest job in the 21st century and so on. There are new tricks and new machine learning and new tools that we can use. And perhaps the role of big data became very prominent when Obama's campaign in 2012 used big data to win his re-election. And since then, the use of data in politics and democracy has kind of went into overdrive until the election of Donald Trump in 2016. And then it was found that his campaign and consultants used millions and trillions of Facebook data, Twitter data to micro-profile electors, and that has led to questions about misinformation and so on, right? And recently in the Philippines, the son of the former dictator, Marcos, the Philippines managed to basically spread misinformation and rewrite history to the point that he was elected as the new president of the Philippines. And perhaps the most potent example of this is when the supporters of Donald Trump, when he lost the election, can't accept was misinformed about the voter fraud and so on, and they stormed the Capitol in America. And just like oil, which has undoubtedly fueled our progress in civilization for the last 100 years or so, now has also threatened to destroy our very existence through climate change and so on. So we think about, will data do the same for our democracy? And we're not just talking about elections here, we're talking about human rights, freedom of expression, about judiciary and independent media. So data is the new oil. I think the excitement about that should come with a little bit of caution. And so today we have Rafizi, who in 2018 has the election model that correctly predicted the downfall of the incumbent government at the time. And interestingly, he has also worked with Andrew Cluster, who was the deputy chief analyst for Obama's re-election campaign in 2012. So I think he's the perfect speaker for today's topic. And without further ado, I welcome Mr. Rafizi Ramli.
It's just to sort of give a brief background about, first how we started out with data, and how we sort of evolved from there. And I think at INVOKE, we are perhaps among the pioneers of data analytics and data science in this country in terms of actually using data science into day-to-day applications. And then perhaps from our own experience, I can outline 2 or 3 societal issues when it comes to data. People often talk about privacy and abuse of data access, but I think there are some other as important, if not more important, issues when it comes to data that is often overlooked by society. So it's good that Nazirul brought up Andrew, because that's how it was started. That's how the whole thing about data and INVOKE and myself with data started. Andrew is a friend. He is a board member of INVOKE. And I sort of stumbled upon him by accident. It just so happened that we had a common friend, a common friend went to LSE together with him. He was at Yale and then he did his master in LSE. So when Obama won the 2012 presidential election against all expectations, because all the key macroeconomic numbers point to a defeat. No American president before him had ever defended a re-election when the job numbers was bad, when the economy was down, when all the macroeconomic numbers were pointing southward. So here you have a group of people, Andrew and his team, which advocated that you only needed to focus on 12 states in the US in order for Obama to win presidential election. That was in 2012. So they started building technology applications where they recruited common people to campaign from home, so long as they have access to their phone. They started profiling, and that's where the whole data science applications got into election. So when Pakatan then lost 2013 general election, so this common friend who was working with Hess and Shell, he was in Perth at that time. So it was like watching CNN, and he suddenly stumbled upon Andrew on telly explaining about how data analytics won Obama's the re-election. So he felt that I actually knew this guy. I went to school with him. So and he was also a friend. So he sort of tried his luck and wrote an email to Andrew and said, remember me? I'm from Malaysia. The so-called the progressive group lost again, and is there anything you could do just out of luck? So Andrew actually replied, and Andrew said, yeah, I've been following what happened in Malaysia for a long time, and Andrew said, if I have time, let's see what I can do. So in 2016, he was working with some pro-democracy progressive parties in Indian general election in 2016. So he actually took a flight, on his own, by his own expense, and dropped by Malaysia. So he knocked so many people's doors. He knocked DAP's doors, he knocked Bersih's doors, everyone's doors, and nobody was interested. So he went back to US and wrote back to this common friend Dinesh and said, hey Dinesh, I actually went with my own expense and nobody was bothered. So that was why Dinesh said, why don't you try Rafizi? He's a bit crazy, So Andrew wrote to me an email, I think sometimes in March 2016, and I said, I remember I still have that email to him and say, look, thank you very much, but we can't afford political consultants because that's not how things work here. So I thought that was the end of it. So one day in Parliament, I think that was May 2016, I went to opposition's office then, and there was this tall American and wanted just 10 minutes of my time. I didn't know that was Andrew, and I didn't know his credential then. And to me, it's just another American, I don't know what he wanted. So he asked for 10 minutes of my time. After all, he came all the way from India then because he was still helping the Indian general election then. So in that 10 minutes, I realized, hey, this guy is crazy. Once I found out that he was Obama's deputy chief analytics, and then he did this on his own. And, in fact, I remember asking, are you a CIA? Because it beggars belief someone would do this. But, and that was the time that I didn't have the heart to say no. And I said, okay, let's do this. I'll put my money first. Let's start a small team and see what we can do with it. And 3 months later, that's how we incorporated INVOKE and started recruiting people, So, and along the way, Andrew and I became very close friends. I went to his wedding in the US. And both of us were basically geeks in our own way. I mean, I was an engineer, I was a technocrat, he's a mathematician, an economist. So we clicked in a sense that our personality was more or less like that. We care about certain society issues, but we're also technocrats, and there were certain areas of interest and sort of data science brought us together. And so along the way, so he helped me build the team here for the first 1 year. So he came in and out of US throughout this 2016 and 17 for free, just out of kindness. And along the way, I went back to the mathematics that I left many years ago in university, and I realized how much things have progressed, how much you can apply maths to profiling. And from there, one thing sort of led to another, because you can't have data science and you can't have mathematical modeling to do anything if you can't deploy it. So you actually need an interface to deploy those algorithms. So that's how suddenly from data science, we had no choice but to start growing our software engineers. So that's, from 2017, I started recruiting software engineers, working, and that's how eventually it became, after general election in 2018, we felt the job was done, and, I ended up with about 100 professionals in tech, digital marketers, creative artists, UI UX engineers, software engineers, data scientists. So I sort of realized from earlier on that we had a good team, because, Andrew said that, the kind of work that your team did here was not much different from the kind of work that the engineers or the professionals you had done for Obama. The difference is Obama had 4,000 engineers. You only have about 4 at that time. So but the quality of technical abilities that Malaysian trained data scientists and software engineers have, as far as Andrew was concerned then, was as good as the ones that he had worked in US for Obama. And that was around 2017 that I thought that. So we made a deal with the team here, because they were not politicians, they were not interested in politics, they just subscribed to change. So the idea was from the very beginning, once we complete so-called the task for the general election, we would pivot into a tech startup, because we could then transfer lock, stock and barrel the whole capability and the whole science into trying to prove that Malaysians can actually run a sustainable and successful regional tech startup. So and the last 2 or 3 years basically give us full exposure to what tech and technology and society is. So I know that it's already like 11, 12 minutes. So let me then take the last 10, 15 minutes just to give an overview about some of the issues that we discovered.
No problem. Go on. Take your time.
Yeah. I know that, I'll get to the privacy, usually when people talk about data, people talk about privacy, but data science and algorithms, automation, and the tech that we talk about now is the same phenomenon that invite mixed opinions when internet first came about, or 100 years before that when mass electrification came about, or 500 years before that when mass printing came about. Every time something new with the potential to affect every level of society comes about, obviously there's a huge debate about whether is it going to be fatal for us, is it going to be good, do you really ban it straight away, do you want to fight it? you know, I embrace technology fully. You know, we are geeks. You know, I'm trained as electronics engineer by nature. We like technology, and that's my view about technology as well. You know, I know that there's a lot of debate about social media, about Facebook, and so on, right? But as with everything with massive potential for changes in society, there's a huge potential for goodness. But if you don't manage that potential, it can be very harmful. So my view has always been that it's not so much about trying to resist technological advance, because there's more good changes that it can bring to society. But those changes and how it affects society depends pretty much on the governance that put around it, you know. Malaysians wouldn't have seen the first democratic change of the government in 2018 if not for Facebook. So whatever people, I know that now Marcos came back, and I know that people sometimes wonder whether it is a force of goodness or a force of evil. My observation is usually, no matter how you classify yourself, as progressive as you call yourself in society, if you don't keep up to date with how advanced technology, something like data science, progress, you tend to be left behind, and there will always be people who take advantage of that advance for, you know, to do damage in society. So it has to be a balance between that, those who see goodness in things like data science, algorithms, tech. You have to believe in it, embrace it, you know, be as advanced than anyone else with it, so that you can influence it for the greater good of society. And you have to balance it, and society has to balance it with the governance that you put in place, because without governance, then even the most innocent thing in society can be harmful. And that's exactly, I think, the case with data science and data as well. For example, a lot of things in this country, you know, remain inefficient. You know, we talk about leakages, that government resources don't really reach to the people who need it most. You know, if we had been able to really micro-target and make sure that every single one person who deserves certain attention would get it, things would have been better. Our biggest economic debate, fiscal debate now, is about targeted fuel subsidy. You know, we've been talking forever about how do we micro-target our fuel subsidies so that we can make sure that the subsidy really reaches out with the right consumption amount to the people who need it most. You know, there's this very rhetorical debate, you know, that subsidy is bad because the top 20 gets it most. And so all this could have been dealt with very easily if we have very advanced data science capability in our government. But we all know that's not the case. You know, even data has not been consolidated in this country, let alone being utilized to micro-target and to profile. I was an MP, and as much as I sympathize with the welfare department officers, because they do try their best to find and to help as many people as possible, never mind the fact that the financial resources were not there, but whatever within their means, they would try their best to reach out. But things are the flip of the coin. If I have the means to do it, I would rather consolidate all the data, the economic data, the registration data, all the data that we have, and we build algorithms to really profile those families, those vulnerable groups who would have would need assistance, welfare assistance, more than anything else. So the process is reversed. Rather than the welfare department or waiting for a report of a child abuse, or for waiting for someone to flag up poor children who got left out of school because the family couldn't afford it. Wouldn't it be much better if we actually know these people by profiling with 80% accuracy beforehand? And then that really helps resource allocation, planning, and you go to them rather than wait for people. This is actually quite possible, and it's not that difficult to do. The process to begin the data consolidation, of course, is humongous, but the science to profile is actually quite straightforward. So that's one example. You can go by the same extension to fuel subsidy. If we have had a system and you have a full stream of a system to deploy the algorithms and the modeling, and you would be able to really assess who needs subsidy, and the policy can be formulated much better because you have enough data to ascertain at what volume of fuel that you can balance that this helps alleviate day-to-day cost of living without crossing the line of skewing the consumption. Because blanket subsidy can skew consumption because people think that it's cheap, they don't care about, because it doesn't hit their pocket. So all this is actually possible, and it would have assisted the country to navigate a generational national issues. But as a country, it's something that we often ignore and nobody care about. And then 2 generations later, I've been around for 45 years. I've heard all the arguments since I was a little kid. We never moved beyond the same rhetorical arguments. The same thing about education. And this is where I think data has the most potential to bring about positive change, especially in a country like Malaysia, where educational opportunities are extremely divisive. It's quite obvious that fiscally, the government cannot afford anymore to build new universities, or even if you build new universities, there is no guarantee that we will be able to churn out graduates that can really get good jobs. So therefore, the need is much greater now than before to make sure that we will be able to provide quality tertiary or even secondary education to as many people as possible at a fraction of the cost that we used to spend. A public university would, for a small capacity of 5,000 people, would easily cost about 1.5 billion ringgit nowadays. That's just for the construction and getting it started. That's not to mention, to maintain the grant and so on. Imagine if quite a lot of the higher education could be done virtually. Imagine that, for example, I've been talking about this for 4 or 5 years because we are a group of geeks here. We try to follow through with everything that's happening. I was amazed with what Salman Khan did with Khan's Academy, giving access to as many people as possible. But I suppose 4 years ago, people would have thought that I was mad, or whoever who talks like this is mad. But after the pandemic, everyone understands now that virtual teaching is no longer a geek thing. It is actually something that has a place in the future. And while you have to balance between people say we lost the human experience and so on, there will always be people who say that. But you need to find a balance where accessibility and democratizing education, quality education to as many people as possible, removing the barriers, will bring more good to society than trying to, give the best experiential campus experience. Of course, the campus will stay. Those who can afford campus will go to campus, but those who can't go to university because they can't afford, or it's really pointless to make a debt of 80,000 ringgit at the age of 25 when there's no guarantee that you will ever get a good job to pay for it. And at the same time, burden the whole society with, basically insolvent debts in PTPTN, right? Data science, tech, and technology is a really good answer to that. And I have a son, 9 years old, who goes to Sekolah Kebangsaan, and I realized that technology and data science allows, for example, competition among teachers from all over the country to create the best contents, because those who are in tech and data understand that it is no longer about the infrastructure. It is about the content. And then technology and data and digital allow us to shift our focus and resources to the content, because once you have the right content with the digital infrastructure that technology allows, with the data science to micro-target, it will enable us to basically scale up and to reach out to as many people with the right micro-targeting. So these are only three, to me. If Malaysia and our society, for example, can embrace data science and can embrace digital and focus on just these three generational pivotal issues in society, we would have been a different country 10 years from now. But of course, it requires a lot of people to believe in all this. Of course, having said that, and the reason why I started with that, because I also want to land to the other big issue when it comes to data, because of course, having said that, there's every reason to worry about privacy. There's every reason to worry about how data can be violated, especially in a country with a track record like ours, where, if government or authorities or even corporate, monopolistic corporate organization can tell us A to Z about ourselves from looking at our data, that opens up to a lot of abuse, that opens up to discrimination, that opens up to persecution to a certain extent, especially if the democratic space remains wobbly, or our society does not transform into a fully democratic country and society that we should. That's in our setup here. That's where Andrew comes in, because Andrew doesn't really spend his time on the actual tech anymore, the actual data science. He spends a lot of time trying to raise the red flag or make sure that the organization doesn't veer off too much from the governance, because some of the things that we do, for example, trying to manage talents through data science, by nature of data science, is that it trains, the model is derived from the data it is trained on. If the data, like what happened in the US, if the successful recruitments usually involve only the whites, so algorithms tend to search for people of the same nature and the same trait. So although unintentionally, algorithms may discriminate against the blacks or the minorities. So that's something that if you are in data science, you have to be very conscious about that, because you can't change society. So if you base your model and your data based on the current state of the society, the current state of society usually has this built-in prejudices, discriminations, unfairness, and injustice, and if you purely build your algorithms to try to mimic or to try to predict based on the current setup, obviously it has the risk of basically amplifying whatever ills in society into algorithms. So, but if by discipline, any organization that works on data fully understand this issue and works and pay more attention to address the built-in inherent, discrimination and prejudices in society, those are some of the things that, for example, at INVOKE, that's the kind of areas that Andrew focuses on. So by and large, I think as much as data will create a new set of problems and a new set of potential abuse, the answer to it is not to shoot it down or not to be too, don't pick a fight with data and technology. Pick a fight with those who are entrusted to put the governance in place. The problem that we have in this country, I mean, I may sound condescending, but sometimes we do need to sound condescending to people. Unfortunately, I think the level of awareness amongst public officials or policymakers is really, really not even rudimentary, to say the least. I mean, they don't really understand. I don't even think that they understand how data modeling works. They don't understand that from simple logistic regression you can predict certain things. So when the level of awareness among policymakers and public officials is not there yet, we will have a situation where the very parties that are supposed to look after the governance part of technology not playing their role. So we won't worry too much if you are in Europe, because GDPR is, quite horrible for data firms. So that the requirement for GDPR compliance is like, for example, I may be a Malaysian and we run platforms, right? In order for us to, we have to comply for GDPR, and that puts me almost, half or one foot in prison all the time, because GDPR subscribes that no matter where you are in the world, if there is a European which uses your platform and your platform does not comply to GDPR, you are liable for imprisonment if you happen to be in Europe. So you don't see I mean, I think people take a bit more comfort if you are in Europe, because the level of awareness and the advocacy and activism of their policymakers and public officials when it comes to the governance around data is obviously way ahead than ours. So that is going to be the challenge of our society, because on the one hand, we are missing out of all the wonderful things that we can do with tech and data science if only we embrace it and we focus on it. So that's already an issue because of capability issues and so on. So we are missing out. On the other hand, even if you have people like us, trying to do our best to advocate and try to do small things that affects changes on the ground with data, if the progress on the governance entrusted to the policy makers and public officials do not catch up at the pace that it is required, then we will also have a problem, So the last bit I want to say before I suppose, we'll have some questions is this. When it comes to tech, data science, and digital, people often just talk about privacy in this country. I have a slightly different view. I don't think privacy is the biggest scare. My biggest concern when it comes to data science and tech platforms is basically economic independence. because by nature of tech and data science and platforms, only the largest of the largest in the world can survive. That's part of the reason that we do INVOKE. And no matter how difficult it is, we keep telling ourselves, don't give up, even though you have to compete with the best of the Silicon Valley, because by nature, Malaysians don't like Malaysians' products, let alone if it's tech products. We just don't have confidence in our own people. But there's a bigger issue than just running a startup. To me, it is very important to build local capabilities and as best as possible local platforms on which people transact, because by nature, tech is monopolistic. Within one generation, don't talk about two generations, within one generation, most probably 80 to 90% of transactions in this country will be on one or two platforms or three platforms at most. These platforms are not Malaysians. These platforms are basically international platforms, and they are huge enough basically to bargain with whatever laws and whatever society thinks in this country. If you try to rein them in when they are so huge, the impact on this in society, because people transact on it on daily basis, is almost telling them that it's almost telling the public that you can't withdraw your cash. And more transactions become digital, whatever is transacted on Grab, whatever is transacted on whatever platforms we have, it will give the platforms, whether it's Google, whether it's Apple, it will give the platforms such international cross-border monopolistic tendency. And what works in US or what works in Europe might not work here, or what is considered as a free and fair transactions anywhere else may ignore certain societal issue that we need to navigate in this country. So my biggest worry, if anything, is not necessarily privacy at this point. My biggest worry is that we don't seem to pay attention to what the future would be if as many digital transactions are on platforms that are not controlled or that is not, Malaysian in origin, or if we allow such platforms to be too monopolistic in this country. So I think, I've taken about half an hour. So perhaps that sets the tone. Then I'll pass back to Nazirul if there are any questions.
Thank you, Raf. I like that, when I was trying to scare everyone about the data is a new oil thing, and then you brought up, how it can be a force for good, directed welfare aids and helping with education, But then my question is about motivation. So when companies delve into data science and so on, the motivation is for them to make money out of it, profit. So, and then when the politicians do it, it's about winning elections. So when talking about, improving people's lives, how can we manage that kind of, motivate them to do what's right instead of for their own benefit? And I like that you talk about monopoly and how they can basically blackmail governments if they are powerful enough that, act against their people's interests. So motivation, that's my question for you. Yeah, how can we do that?
This is the bit where balance. We need to strike a balance between the idealism behind it and the reality behind it. I mean, of all people in Malaysia, we know this by first-hand experience. It's a tough business to be in tech and data business, and when you attempt to do something that is experimental or new, you require investors who are willing to burn their money in that small percentage that it will ever be sustainable financially. You may find a lot more in Silicon Valley, but definitely there's hardly in Malaysia, So definitely society cannot run away from the reality that any technology requires financial sustainability. And we also need to be realistic that usually sustainable technology can only be developed and prolonged and prospered by financial incentives, because you've seen in the communist country or in other systems when it's not really financially motivated, it's not sustainable, because what you create is you create a black hole where the society or state just pour in money, you know, on the basis of financial advancements, just as a political means, but the technology itself will not be able to fund, and therefore it's not sustainable. Okay, so that's where I think we have to strike a balance, that we have to accept first and foremost that technology and data will, one way or another, will have some financial motives attached to it. The way I see it is that given how sensitive society is when it comes to privacy and abuse of data, and given in some jurisdictions, the data governance structure is very solid, such an environment will allow for only those products that deploy data science and tech that really minimize the abuse of data from massive profiteering. Only those ones will survive. What we see now, especially, you know, all the hoo-ha about Facebook, was that because of the monopolistic nature of Facebook for the first 10 years, 15 years, people don't really have a choice, because when people balance between the need to spread information, the force of goodness that it does play in some parts of the world, because Facebook and social media was the only means to reach out to people, because state television, national media were totally controlled, you know. So we were, you know, such societies, and we are not careful, we may be that society as well. Such societies didn't really have a choice, because they have to weigh between, you know, privacy and profit orienteering compared to, you know, the bigger, the greater good of trying to force change in a society. But consumer and users actually are the ultimate power in the whole thing, because the good thing about tech is that by nature it's very scalable, that if there is such a tech product that so openly and grossly abuse, you know, the data that is entrusted in its hands, it can go up as fast, but it can also go down as fast. And if you couple that with the right governance structure, you know, such platforms or such products will be very careful in their risk assessment, not to be too risk-taking when it comes to paying attention to data privacy. So it's actually about market dynamics, and that market dynamics is made up of users and people out there who fully understand and have the capacity to really differentiate between a tech product or a platform that uses data but minimizes profiteering, so that, you know, the risk for abuse is lower, between the one that massively abuse its either monopolistic position or massively abuse the data that they collect, you know. So and when you have a market of users like this in a framework of governance structure that is solid, and I think that's how we balance between the need to have tech players and data science players who do not abuse their first mover advantage for massive profiteering. And what we're trying to do at INVOKE is more or less that we are trying to not make money that much. We're trying to survive financially, but we also want to make sure that whatever we do is financially sustainable.
Of course.
That means that the way, the parameters and metrics by which you judge your progress as an organization, as a commercial entity, is not wholly and exclusively financial. There's also other parameters and metrics that you use to justify that, is a force of change that has non-financial effects, not just on society, but also internally to us. So the more we advocate for that, and I think in the future, it's something that any tech players can't run away from. That's what society expects, and eventually public policymakers and officials will actually catch up as well. And that's why educating and bringing the level of awareness to society with the right perspective. Don't be, I am anti-data, it's all about privacy. It's a lot more complicated than that. It's about every single one of us playing our role, because it's important to create the ecosystem that can then balance the force of goodness that tech and data science can bring against the risk that it might come about if it's not managed well.
Yeah, so in a way that governance is so important. So we need the right people in the government, the policymakers, to create that. Right. So I think we have a few questions here. First one is: will INVOKE play a role in the next general election? That's a big one, I suppose.
No. No.
That's a straight answer. That
it's a straight answer. No, I mean, it's like I don't know about other people. I'm trained as a technocrat and professional, and in my all my years running organizations, you really have to be clear about your objective. And the moment you lose sight about your objectives, or you start dabbling around with certain things that you're not meant to do, and you will lose everything. So we've pivoted to become a commercial entity in 2019. And we have stakeholders. We've raised 15 million ringgit so far to pay, and then we owe it to the shareholders. The teams that we have, they have technology objectives. So we can easily transfer the skill that we have to a new set of people outside INVOKE. And
are there any players that are trying to do that?
Sorry?
Will you do?
No. I mean, in the sense that, in a sense that, I think when we started in 2016, it was a lot more difficult because we didn't understand it. Society was quite apprehensive about the whole thing. I know that even my strongest supporters or closest friends thought that it was just a hype. It's like this whole thing about using data science to win election was, but I think people are more open to it now. People understand that it can be done. So, and I also have slightly a different view. I don't like to concentrate a skill to just a set group of elite people. We've gone through the hardship trying to build the capability and proving that it can be done. And I think it's a lot more to convince volunteers and people to do it in a different setup, differently, that does not meddle in the way, because INVOKE now is a commercial entity, and we can't be both. We can't be a non-profit social enterprise, yet at the same time we want to be a commercial entity. You will not get both. So I think most probably what will happen in the next general election, we will train more people. Even as it is now, we've run virtual boot camps to convert of course they have to pay for it, but it's at dirt cheap price. It's so affordable. It's almost 10% of what the market rate is. So we believe more on that, not really profiteering, but whatever we do is just enough to cover for our costs, but making it more accessible to other people. So I'm sure there are many people who can pick up data science and software engineering and creative and digital marketing very quickly. And with a little bit of training here and there, you can gather a new set of volunteers again to replicate what we did in 2016, 2018. So, but to bring these people who already have their, knee deep in the whole thing, and try to yank them out and say, okay, now you go and focus and do this. It doesn't benefit either way. I think that's my view. So categorically, I think I can say that nope, I don't think INVOKE will be involved in the next year election.
All right, there you go. Priya, you want to take the next one?
Okay, so you've got one question here on education. So this person says, your comment on the state of higher education industry in Malaysia is an interesting one. For us here in Malaysia, how do you see the future for public and private institutions to coexist, especially with large capital investments made today by private investors expecting future returns?
It's like this is my personal observation, because I interviewed thousands of graduates every year. we hire about 100 plus each year, give and take. I think the biggest issue. Okay, sorry. Let me rephrase this. There are two big issues that can really basically collapse the confidence and faith people have in higher education in Malaysia, whether it's private or public. First is the value of education, because you see more and more people graduating with a student loan. If they go to private education, the student loan is higher. If they go to public education, they still actually have student loan. It's just that it's not as much. So we are seeing, especially with Gen Z, we are seeing a generation with student loans, but their degree has no value. It doesn't really bring them up to what they thought they would have before they step into higher education. So that actually is a big issue that I wonder whether this is being thought of seriously by the higher education players in this country, whether they are public or private institution. Because if we are not careful, we will have a generation of people who have gone through that hardship of paying through their nose for education, only to end up doing things that have no need for tertiary degree. So if you imagine, after one generation, you have a group of people who have lost faith in higher education altogether. And this will perpetuate to the next generation. Because if I go through that, and hardship and the disappointment of having a good degree, a good CGPA, and quite reputable public or private institution, but having to search for work, for jobs for a year, and it's disappointing. And eventually I have to do things on my own, gigs here and there, just to support myself. I would imagine that I would tell my children that, what I've gone through, it's not worth it. You are better off skipping tertiary education altogether. So if we are not careful and we don't address this question about the value that higher education offers to students, in the future, whatever, no matter how much investments you put in now, you may be facing that problem in the future where people think that, my language, but screw education, so it's, let's just keep it all together. So, and I can feel that the younger generation feels that now, and to me it's worrying. It's actually because I believe that education is the most potent tool to liberate anyone. No change in society ever happen without the important role of education. The more accessible it is, the more quality the education is, there's a direct correlation with progress in society. So if you don't tackle it and you allow it to simmer until up to a point when people have lost faith in education, and especially higher education, then we'll be facing a completely different challenge in the future. So that's to me even more pressing an issue in higher education than the second structural issue, which is accessibility. Of course, you know, back then during my time in school, there were not many top scorers. So if you have a good SPM, chances are you have a good scholarship or you have good enrollment into good university and so on. Nowadays, you know, I can share with you almost everyone whom we call for interview, and that's like, you know, 300, 400 a year, most of them are straight A's. So I can imagine if I'm a student now, school leaver, you know, my 9 A's actually in the grand scheme of things, you know. So we have a society where academic excellence has been benchmarked to what you scored in your XPM, right? So you can't blame parents or families who feel like, hey, hang on, you know, my children got 9 A's, they should have a good place in a good university. So, you know, we continuously perpetuate a demand for more higher education place, you know, whether artificially or not, I don't know. You know, there's, you know, we have to look at the data and it can. And on top of that, we also have a national target that, you know, by certain year, you know, 30% of school leavers should have first degree, you know, and that is going to go higher and higher and higher. So there is an intrinsic pressure that we continuously create places for higher education. And that's where that's also going to be a big polemic, because on the one hand, the government is not in a fiscal position to create as many places or many new public universities as fast as the demand is. And even if government wants to do that, most probably, sorry to say, most probably is at the expense of quality, because it's all about, you know, having colleges here and there, you know, with not so much good facility, with something that was not thought through properly for over a long time. It's just about meeting numbers and ticking boxes, you know. And again, even if they do that, most probably they still cannot keep up with the demand for higher education places in society. So it will create demands for private institutions to do it, you know. So and of course, when there is a demand, there will always be, you know, a supply, and you will see, I think you will see a continuous supply and expansion or growth in private higher education, which then will rebound back to the first question, which is, if higher education grows in this country, either through public or private sector, but if the growth is pursued without too much thought about the quality and the value that higher education provides to students, there will come a point when there will be a bust. The bubble will burst at some point, you know, because as this Gen Z generation goes through this, and if we don't address it, you know, structurally and quickly, you know, the growth will catch up with a generation of parents who have gone through years of paying for education debt but not getting the value of it. So you know, I mean, people don't like me because they think that I always paint the scariest picture of everything, you know.
Do you think this has a lot to do with the very narrow idea and concept of education? Because everybody is moving into that tertiary higher education. Education is really such a broad concept, but I think it has been so narrowly defined, and we tend to follow Western ideas, ideals that don't really explore, a person's real potential towards very different types of skills and potential.
I mean, spot on, Priya. I mean, I 100% agree to that. And that's partly why we created INVOKE, because, I mean, it's like, the way we brand INVOKE to fresh graduates, we are anomalies. This is a place where people who can't fit in but smart will thrive. Because I mean, my first careers were all in international setup, huge corporations. People like me who are quite good at talking. It's like usually get the place. The focus is charisma, so to speak. Whether you have a brain or substance is a different thing altogether. So in the process, the corporate culture and sometimes, the way organizations work, only certain type of people who tick boxes, and that boxes usually is more about forms rather than substance. Every now and then you get people both with form and substance, but the emphasis has always been towards evaluating charisma more than anything else. And whereas there are a lot of people out there who are very good at what they do, but don't need to say a single word. I mean, software engineers, I mean, I don't need to talk to them. I mean, they write codes and they can do marvelous things, not speaking to anyone for 1 month. Same with the scientists and so on. But, if these people have gone through the normal job interview process, they would have been rejected. I mean, right. I know, for example, we have our data scientists here, first class in maths, in uni, and then master in data science from Cornell. I actually think that if he were to go to interview at Petronas, he would have been rejected because, he's an introvert. He hardly say anything, So that is not just a problem with the way that we view education in this country. The problem is a lot more pervasive than just education. It's the whole structure of the society where we look at stereotypes. I remember when I was in school, I did quite well in school, and obviously the education policy then in the 80s and 90s did streaming that if you were a good student, you would have to do pure science,
right.
Okay, I mean, pure science. But I kind of know, as much as I love maths and physics, I really didn't want to end up being an engineer in a power plant. I know that my strength, while I'm quite good at numbers, but my strength is more like arts. I love history more than anything else. So I wanted to do law. I thought that I would have been a much better lawyer than an engineer. But the way that society governs ourselves in the last 30, 40 years, we go by stereotypes. The stereotypes is the smarter ones have to be engineers. So
they compartmentalize
everything, and that was the reason why I actually did electronic and electrical engineering. Not that I regret it, because it's now quite useful when I run a tech startup. But, I was a bit lucky because I was, unconventional enough to pivot after graduate. And I said, what, I'm not going to do that. And the easiest way to pivot was to become a chartered accountant because, at least it combines them. But what about thousands of others who may not be as unconventional? So they ended up doing something where their skills and passion and real potentials could never grow to the fullest because they were compartmentalized to do certain things that, they could do it, but that's not where their potential is. So likewise, the same with our so-called, stereotyping education benchmarking is. We go by the law of average. So by the law of average at XPM, if you have two people, one person get 9 A's, but the A's is just maybe 80 for all, and the other person actually get 5A plus and 5B, and that 5A plus is 95% throughout for all the science subjects. That 5A plus is considered stupid compared to these 9 A's. But, if you put that 5A plus and put him as a aerospace engineer, maybe that's what he wanted to do all along, most probably he will be much better off than this person. But our approach in society, from education to employment to promotion to recognition, everything is based by the law of average and stereotypes. And that's why I think a lot of people don't like me, because I mean, it's really against, I think, what this society.
So square peg in a round hole.
That's why I always feel that I'm a misfit, anywhere I go, because my view usually runs counter to the very basis that has created the environment. People will see that you think too highly of yourself because you come from that system. And now you say that system is, it doesn't promote, the best of the best. But I, having run tech startup, having been in parliament, having run corporations, I wish that we had been a lot more liberal when it comes to allowing people from as young as they were in primary school and to pursue their real interest, their passion. So in that sense, we really need to have confidence in our own talents and in our own ability. And I think that's something that society will take a while to understand, that if we
that's what education should do, isn't it?
That's what education should. That's why primary education, my son, I know that things can get very competitive in primary school. I actually don't give a damn about how he performs that much. I think what is most important is for him to have the confidence of himself and the love to pursue something, whatever it is.
Because exploring his interests and potential.
Because what sustains a person is not, your ability to do arithmetics at 10-year old. Is that passion to continuously learn and be, impressed by things that happen around you. And it's sometimes I feel is the inquisitive part that is missing from our society. But if we go through this, Priya, it's like that's like 10 years of argument in this country.
Education is a big debate and discussion in this country. The structure seems to be, very rigid.
If I were to bring it back to what we wanted to talk about, tech and data science and so on, that's where I think if we take the gamble and embrace tech in education from primary to secondary schools, we would have more data points to be able to convince ourselves that people who do not fit stereotypes actually have more chance to be successful in the future. Because if you have the data points, you would have been able to prove it. The problem with
that's right. It's database policy.
It's database policy. And I'm quite sure if you take a generation and if you tracked it and you basically, apply data science to it, you would have been able to prove that stereotyping is not the optimal solution. That allowing people to pursue their passion and removing this benchmark of average success or the law of average.
That's right.
Success.
And it takes someone like you or some, who has gone through the system to then turn around and say, hey, the system doesn't work. Because if you hadn't gone through the system, you won't really see the flaws and evolved or grown the way you've now and said that, stereotypes is not the way to go. So we're part of a system and we're changing to now turn around and say, look, this is not working. I'm also part of the system and, I see that. I see how stereotyping is just not the way to go. And I hope it doesn't happen with the next generation.
I agree with that. It's just that sometimes, when it comes to being a part of the system, sometimes the resistance from inside is actually quite strong. So sometimes I feel like, for example, the reason why, I decided to just withdraw from politics and focus on INVOKE, because sometimes there is a lack in understanding between, in society between an idea and only later on when they see it for themselves, then they might be convinced. So sometimes it's about balancing between, you know, advocating your views and trying to prove in a little way that actually, you know, I have a reason why I say it. And so, and that's why I hope that more and more young people will be more daring in their life options. And I hope more and more people will try to do, for example, startup, not so much because it's a hype, but it's very important to prove that you can adopt an unconventional path and you can make a difference and be successful. Because if you have 3 or 4 that have proven that it can be done, you know, it will convince more of a, you know, out of that generation of pool of people and say, hang on, I mean, that's working. And then, and so in the same way that from my time in politics, you know, I mean, normally people like me won't survive politics because I say what I want to say, you know. People who call a spade don't survive politics.
A lot of people appreciate that kind of approach. Yeah, so
but,
we need
you know,
more of that actually.
I actually wanted to prove a point. You know, I have a lot, especially the older generation, and say, you know, we like you, but you know, you are stupid because you are brash, you are blah blah blah. I mean, there's a reason why I stick to my gun, because I wanted to prove a point that you can call a spade and still survive politically in this country. Because I think if I survive, there will be more people who say, hang on, I mean, after all, he survived, you know. So sometimes things can work out of the system. Sometimes, you know, we have to be daring enough to explore certain means outside the system, because I mean, I know that this sounds stupid, but it's almost like Matrix, you know. I mean, it's like the system, you know. If you watch Matrix the movie,
yeah, it's a documentary as far as I'm concerned.
Everyone is conditioned to believe in whatever. So it takes some crazy people to say, hey, hang on, this is not the reality, you know. There's more to it, and eventually we'll build up and so on, you know.
Is that why you're back into politics?
Well, not really. I mean, it's like it's a lot more straightforward than that, you know. I believe in karma, so it's like, you know, there comes a point when people keep asking and keep hoping. There comes a point when I feel like the choice between my personal life choices and letting people down, you know, when it tilts to your life choices sort of disappoint other people, when more and more people get disappointed, I think karma will come back. So I feel like, you know, I may have crossed the line that, you know, people might feel that I'm arrogant and that I'm selfish and so on. So I feel like, you know, whatever I can give, I'll try, because you know, it's goodwill. You know, people expected that I will be able to contribute something. Then let's see what I can do. But it's nothing of a grand plan. There was a point, a tilting point when I feel that if I were in their shoes, and I was hoping that this guy would do something and he just couldn't care less, you know, I would feel really crossed. And I feel that when enough people feel crossed, I will be crossed, you know. So that's the part that I feel like, oh, okay, you know, so maybe I should consider it. Yeah.
Right. And, you know, listening to the ideas that you have for moving forward, I think it's good to have you in the conversation in the policy, actually, at least, you know. So we appreciate that you're coming back to politics.
Well, not many politicians do, but yeah.
But the masses do, I think.
A lot of politicians think that I threw a spanner too much in the whole, you know, political discourse.
That's the whole point, isn't it? I mean, like, the new generation appreciate your boldness, and you just say things as it is, you know. But sometimes people who are more conservative, they want things as it is, have to be too polite and too, you know.
I think Nazirul is like this, I think the fence-sitters or people who have no political allegiance and who will be open to evaluating politicians in whatever way they come, I think they tend to appreciate more frankness. But if you are political supporters, you have made up your mind which parties you want to support, then I'm a nuisance because I
But, football, I mean, politics shouldn't be like football. It's not Liverpool, Man U kind of thing. You shouldn't be too fixed to a team, right? It should be policy based.
Okay, I have a question. Do you think sitters are crucial?
Sorry, the what?
I think the fence sitters are crucial.
They are. In fact, no power transfer has ever happened, I think, democratically in this world by mere support of the political party diehards. Never happened. There is a reason why there is a phrase called silent majority, because the majority is really silent. I mean, they have to go about their life, day-to-day life. Politics is something that someone else play about, and unless it really affects their life, they try to limit political contents as much as possible. And in any society, about 40% at least of voters are this type of fence-sitters, and they are very open to ideas, and they evaluate performance. They are more critical and objective. So that's why in any election, the parties that the political party that wins usually wins on the back of a swing of the fence-sitters. And I think that's the fault in this country, because the noise has always come from the political party supporters, the diehards. These people will justify anything, regardless of how many court sentences that Najib gets. They will say that Najib is innocent. No matter what gaps Anwar Ibrahim does, the diehards will say that he's our savior. And in Malaysia, I think it comes to a point where, if we are not careful, political diehards and politicians from both sides of the divide may put off the fence-sitters, because the fence-sitters are more concerned about solutions, are more futuristic. They are open to suggestions, and they are more realistic in evaluating performance. And that's the thing. And I feel like not just because I think that it's necessary to win over the fence-sitters. The reason why I call a spade, or I speak my mind, is because I think that, I never see myself as a politician. I have always lived, just like another person. I run a company, or before this, I used to work for corporation. And I try to limit as best as possible my, the time that I spend drinking coffee with politicians, because I think it makes you sort of out of touch a bit. Because, if you are a politician and you spend all your time with politicians, you tend to be in your bubble, So it's not really just because I think it's important to win over the fence-sitters, but I think the real issues in this country and the real solutions that can bring a sustainable change in society usually come from the fence-sitters, because they are the biggest majority. And they are, the ones who basically are objective about whether it works or if you pitch your idea to your supporters, no matter how bad it is, they will say it's good, and vice versa. But you have to be able to pitch and convince the fence-sitters and say, this idea can work. And that's a real effective soundboard compared to your supporters. So that's my view about fence-sitters. And whichever political parties that can convince the fence-sitters will win the election.
Right. Okay. Wow. Thank you so much. We're almost 4:30 now.
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't take much of your time.
It's all right. Though I do have to take a leave, because I have and another meeting at 4:30.
Thank
But
you
yeah,
so
I mean,
much.
Okay, thank you
Yeah.
so much. I think we've covered everything that we've advertised in the seminar, from data to democracy to politics to your vision for the country. So I think it's
Yeah.
really great, and I think we can have another seminar to just talk about that. You know, the politics of all these things.
Well, I mean, we can always do, you know, in the future, you know, yeah, I mean, if I get early notice and I can block my time, and maybe in the future, you know, I mean, I didn't have enough time to really spread the words around because I was busy with party election, but perhaps, you know, in the future, we can always do this with bigger audience, you know, and see what the public.
This is the first step to our data and democracy project that we are doing. So really appreciate having you to kind of kickstart our project here. And if we have something else, we definitely will next semester. Actually, we're planning something. We'll invite you, inshallah. Right.
Sure. Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rafizi, and good luck for your elections. Good luck.
All the best.
We talked out, but good luck.
I really don't know how it will go, and it's like, you know, I'm running the election from this office, a startup office, so I really don't know how it will turn out, but well, we'll see. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thanks a lot, and hope you guys enjoy it. We'll catch up again some other time.
We'll do.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.